The US solar return chart for 2025 is not subtle. It displays deep ruptures in alliances, poisoned information streams, a possible economic identity crisis, and some strange symbolism around bees, toxic honey, and, as always, toxic agreements. Language turns lethal, contracts unravel, some secrets refuse to stay buried, and this episode uses the solar return birthday chart of the USA to see what's in store for America's year ahead. Find out what happens when Leo-ruled nations like Israel or Italy clash with the Plutonian shadows of America's quest for ultimate power. This is not normal horoscope astrology. This is world mundane astrology, the very same chart analysis and practice that earned myself and some of my financier clients a very pretty penny in this year's stock market crash. That happened after some of last year's July 4th predictions really came true. So join me as we look beneath the surface. So every single year, each of us get what astrology calls a solar return chart. It happens for you, it happens for me, your pets, your friends, relatives, and strangers. Because everybody experiences a birthday, the day when the sun returns to the exact position that it occupied when you were born. And this is the moment that marks a fresh start. It sets the tone for the year ahead by revealing the themes and the challenges and the opportunities that are uniquely tailored to you. It's a chapter of your story for the period of 1 year. And so your birthday, your original birth chart, represents the whole entire movie of your life. The ongoing transits show kind of what scene you're in within that movie. And then the birthday solar return chart gives you the depth. It gives you the script even of that particular scene. The solar return is a snapshot of the sky on your birthday, current real time. And it's like the universe handing you a roadmap for the next 12 months. And it's valid for 12 months only. So come your next birthday, it's utterly, utterly invalid. It expires, it stops working, especially as a predictive forecasting tool. So it's this solar return birthday chart that gives you 64 dates within the year ahead. It's 64 dates of 64 events that show up, which is always worth knowing and preparing for. And sitting just outside of the personal use of astrology, many astrologers like to look at the world and countries and industries and such with their own individual patterns and cycles and charts. And so we apply the solar return benefits, the solar return, which is considered the most accurate predictive format out there. We apply it to the things we want to understand more in depth. And this time of year is rife with analysis of the United States, drawn from the moment that the USA declared independence on July 4th, 1776 in Philadelphia. The birth chart of the USA captures the nation's core identity, its strengths, its struggles. And then just like it happens for you, for me, for others, each year on July 4th, the USA solar return chart resets, offering a preview of the year ahead for the country itself. Now, there has been some questioning about the specifics of the chart. I mean, we already know that the date was July 4th. We know that the year was 1776. We know that the location was Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. But the main questions are regarding the time. The most widely used time is 5:10 p.m. And this is because that's the historically recorded time when the Continental Congress is said to have officially adopted the Declaration of Independence. And much like the very first breath of yourself as a baby, astrologers consider this moment the birth of the United States as a sovereign nation. This time marks the official founding moment of the country's unique identity. So it forms the foundation of the USA's natal chart, which we then use to track its solar returns and forecast the year ahead. There are some other times that have been hypothesized as worthwhile, but the 5:10 p.m. in Philadelphia is the standard time for the USA's birth chart based on the official adoption of the Declaration of Independence. So some astrologers do propose alternative times that reflect other milestones during that historic day. One other time is said to be around 2:20 p.m. when the Declaration was first publicly read aloud in Philly. Then there's this mid-morning suggested time around 10 a.m. And that's when the final wording is said to have been agreed upon by Congress. One other time is a little later in the evening, around 6 p.m. or after, when some believe that the full signing process was actually completed. And each of these times produce slightly different charts, emphasizing different themes and planetary placements, but for mundane astrology and most forecasting, the 5:10 p.m. time is preferred. And that's simply because it marks the formal, legal birth of the nation. Essentially, the Declaration of Independence is also the USA's version of its own birth certificate. So before we dive into what the US solar return chart reveals for 2025, let's take a moment to reflect on last year's forecast. Many of the themes highlighted in the previous year's July 4th episode and episodes prior to that, from economic upheavals to political shifts, unexpected ruptures, a lot of those predictions played out with some interesting accuracy. Starting further back, I do remember the 2023 episode of the July 4th predictions, including Boeing air flight issues, which panned out pretty obviously between 2023 and 2024. But it's the 2024 episode itself that was a whole different beast. And the first date that I pulled from last year's solar return for the USA was July 13th, with my initial prediction being about a change in relationship between the USA and Canada, the USA and Venezuela, the USA and Argentina, which kind of didn't happen on that day. It didn't happen on that day, and I'll hold my hands up there. But what did transpire on that day led to a change in alliance with Canada, Venezuela, and Argentina. So things did happen, but not directly. First, looking at what did happen, July 13th, 2024 was the first attempted assassination on Donald Trump. The famous bloody ear picture. Politics has gotten vicious and extremely, extremely divisive in the past decade. And it's not even just about being divisive. These attempts of assassination are perhaps consequences of the main streaming of internet echo chambers that radicalize some maybe slightly unhealthy minds. And it's not like assassination attempts were rare before the internet. It's just that I'm sure the internet hasn't helped. Looking back at that date, a lot of people might agree, you may even agree, that the assassination attempt of Donald Trump on July 13th, 2024 was the moment when Trump won the 2024 election. Before the election even happened, the national sympathy for him getting shot at might have played a big part in catapulting him to re-election. And it's a little bit similar to Italian dictator Mussolini, who survived an assassination attempt in 1926. This was when a bullet grazed his nose. And rather than weaken him, that failed attack boosted his image. And he used the incident to tighten his grip on power, framing himself as a survivor. And some people even say it was that very moment, that event, that gave him so much political momentum. Now, when it comes to conspiracy theories, there was a lot of talk about the July 13th, 2024 attempted assassination date, which was mentioned in last year's Solar Return episode, as being a staged assassination attempt. And maybe this is simply because humanity's trust in plain facts has been eroded so completely by the media. Plus, Trump's history in reality TV as a wrestling showman, of course, then things can seem suspicious. But a preponderance of all the evidence shows it as a legitimate assassination attempt. And maybe with all the confusion and data and just sheer division, you can begin to see why it's not a big stretch for some people to believe that it was a setup. It's a situation that felt like a play right out of an authoritarian PR handbook. To create chaos, to survive it publicly, and then to watch your approval ratings climb. We've seen this tactic before, not just in politics, but regular reality TV. And also Trump's reaction on that day has been cited as a reason for believing the situation was fake. Because usually violence makes people kind of confused, trying to figure out what happened, whereas this image of the fist bump in front of the American flag seems like an unusual response. But there is a fight or flight mechanism where some people go hard into the conflict and others flee for safety. It's just a case that everybody is different. So there is that, the fact that people act all kinds of different ways when they are in shock or in some kind of high adrenaline situation. I personally witnessed a shooting of a man in his leg, when I was 18, 19 years old. And I just jumped into hero response. I used a shirt to tourniquet the victim's thigh. And there was this person in a Scream mask, an actual Scream mask from the movie, with a sawn-off shotgun in a plastic bag. And this person ran past me by inches as they fled the scene. And nobody else in the area did a thing. No one did a single thing. I became Nurse Charlie, and I simultaneously called the emergency services while wrapping up this guy's leg, and I jumped into adrenaline-driven action. But then when I was taken down to the police station to give my statement, within a few minutes of sitting down, taking a breath, being given a glass of water, I threw up. I pure vomited all over the officer's desk. We each react differently to stress. It's individual circumstances and the way our bodies change over time that determine our reaction. So with all the claims and questions and curiosities of how an assassin was able to secure a location merely 500 feet from Trump's position, claims of how text messages from a police sniper indicated that the police were already aware of this assassin 90 minutes before the shooting, and that's according to Wikipedia. The plethora of AI-generated and manipulated images circulating online. You can see how this situation is so delicate. But the truth is that day was the day that the election was kind of called. And I'm on no side of politics. I've said it before, and it remains true that my head is in the stars. I'm more interested in the cycles of time and history as guidance, the environment that nurtures us all in certain ways and how we respond differently. But there are supporters and non-supporters alike that have openly said that fated day influenced decisions and voting. And it was fated because the July 4th Solar Return episode last year called that very date. July 13th, a pivotal moment. And yes, it wasn't the initial relationship and alliances matters I had seen. But if we think about this in a domino effect, it kind of was. because it was under the new elected president that we saw the relationship with Canada and other countries begin to change. So perhaps what I saw was the end result, and what happened on July 13th was the seeding. It's funny because astrology is not always as direct and straightforward. It can be pretty cryptic. What then went on to occur was a whole bunch of relational shifts. And then another part of last year's episode predicted a trade war, which we saw show up as tariff issues in March of 2025. And that date was also predicted, and it did develop as is, to the point that a few clients of mine, finance-based clients, who decided to short the market prior to my predicted time of a tariff or trade war. These clients made out like bandits when the stock market tanked on April 2nd after a frightful announcement that tariffs were going to be extortionate. And one last example of last year, because I really want to get onto this year, was the mention of a tsunami. It became pretty clear to me that water-related severe and weather kind of developments were on the cards, and I went down the rabbit hole of tsunamis, and the chart looked very supportive of that. Now, to this date, no tsunami has happened, but there has been a mention of tsunamis, which began a couple months ago, and as of today's news on July 3rd, there's a ton of sources fearing a tsunami off of Japan, and also a recent rare tsunami roll that hit Portugal. And so those are just a couple of the predicted and forecasted events in last year's July 4th, 2024 episode. That was aired exactly 1 year ago today. I'll link that below in case you want to re-listen, but let's go and get to the good stuff. Let's look at this year, the July 4th, 2025 solar return for the USA. The first notable positions are Mercury and Mars in the 7th house. In mundane astrology, the 7th house governs a nation's foreign relations. This includes treaties, alliances, rivalries, and legal confrontations between nations. So it reflects both diplomatic engagements and adverse conditions with other sovereign locations, and with both planets Mercury and Mars occupying this house for the USA. The forecast leans towards a period of heightened dialogue, agreements, contracts, rules, and communication occurring simultaneously with conflict and or aggression. The juxtaposition of these two planets in the same house suggests that negotiation and confrontation may occur in parallel, or even within the same international relationships. So the themes are trade negotiations and agreements with international partners. Trade and communication treaties are emphasized, particularly with nations associated with Mercury-like traits, so commercial hubs, or younger, maybe more agile, moving economies. And also a likely focus in areas including digital commerce, AI regulation, and telecommunications infrastructure. Think along the lines of drafting and signing of new bilateral or multilateral contracts, some kind of highly complex commercial agreement involving trade regulation and labor law reforms even. Some kind of US, EU, artificial intelligence regulation framework maybe. And just a focus on setting shared legal standards. Maybe some kind of regulatory developments or AI involvement. And actually, as of today, I did see that July 3rd, the US lifts the curb for chip design software as a trade truce. Maybe this is it. Maybe this is part of it. And it is several days early. Or maybe there's just more developing because this aspect goes into effect when the sun enters Leo around July 23rd. And that's when it actually activates some kind of mercurial trade agreement or disagreement on August the 1st and August the 2nd. But that's really where it is now, with further developments pending. The 7th house of astrology and its meaning is a real big beacon in this year's July 4th chart. And it also alludes to possible foreign education, youth-related programs, increased logistical activity such as cargo shipping or aviation coordination, especially with regulatory review or some kind of progressive updates. The historical parallel timeframes are 1989 to 1991, during the lead up to and the aftermath of the Cold War's end. There was a lot of seventh house activity with rapid diplomatic restructuring, treaty drafting, massive media presence, influencing global perception. And a quick peek at the 1989 solar return chart for the USA did show a heavy seventh house. So maybe we can and will still see parallels there. So that one is Mercury in the seventh, some agreements, some reform, some contracts, some discussions, and they're possibly not all productive and pleasant because Mercury does oppose Pluto in this chart. So this means that during this chapter of the story, maybe really beginning July 4th and intensifying through August the 1st and 2nd, the nation's core identity and self-expression is deeply challenged and deeply transformed, actually, through its relationships, partnerships, and diplomatic engagements. With this tension between the need to assert power and control, which is Pluto's opposing influence, as well as the need to communicate, negotiate, and exchange information. And all of that stuff is Mercury. This is intensified on a national level, and really the only answer is compromise, not dominance in either direction. An opposition in astrology seeks balance. If it were maybe a square, it could be a game of dominance, but it's not. So all these agreements need is an approach that looks at win-win for all involved. And the whole chart really shows that we can expect 2025 to be a year where issues around foreign alliance, trade agreements, international influence are going to be front and center, possibly involving intense power struggles, revelations that reshape how the country relates to other countries. These dynamics will be filtered through themes of innovation, disruption, and a push towards new social and political paradigms. In other words, the US will be navigating a critical transformation where its foundational, financial, and power structures are redefined through partnership. And let's look at partnerships with who? The partnerships are really dependent on the signs that fall on the 7th, 8th, and 9th houses of the USA solar return chart. So these are the signs of Leo, Virgo, and Libra. And the Leo countries are France, Italy, Romania, and some mundane astrologers also say it's Afghanistan, Rome, and within the US, Chicago, Illinois. The Virgo countries and places are said to be Brazil, Switzerland, and Turkey. And then back within the States, it's Boston and Scottsdale, Arizona. And then Libra countries and places, China, Japan, Australia, and parts of India, Tibet, Argentina, and Siberia. And so out of that list, China is really the one we are most familiar with, but the others are a worthy mention. With those in mind, we then look at Mars in the 7th house. The interpretive themes using the symbolism suggest foreign quarrels, military tension, legal conflicts between nations, possibly involving sanctions or military exercises. There is undoubtedly a risk of conflict escalations, particularly with historically antagonistic or heavily armed places. And the issues are also involving border disputes, allied defense responsibilities, NATO commitments, increased activities involving armed forces, defense industries, foreign defense contractors. So realistically, these scenarios might be verbal or legal escalations, maybe first with some neighboring countries like Canada and Mexico, though very likely to be administrative and trade related more than anything, unless particularly aggravated by border or immigration pressures. Plus some legal or political pushback from foreign powers in response to US financial sanctions or military posturing, cyber aggression, especially because this Mars placement in the 7th house squares Uranus. So some kind of technological sabotage with Mars in a communicative house like the 7th. And most of this conflict stuff looks to transpire between July 23rd and September the 3rd, with September the 3rd actually being the most heightened date. The next point, looking at the moon in the 9th house of the solar return chart for the USA, focuses national attention and emotional response on foreign affairs again, international developments, immigration issues, academic and judicial debates, even religious or ideological tensions, especially involving foreign influences. Maybe some kind of development regarding the new pope, given that the country location and the theme of religious ideologies show up here. And because the 9th house is international and it follows the 7th and 8th house, which are to do with relationships, the moon in the 9th house does bring up the phrase accumulation of foreign land, which could manifest as acquisition of foreign military bases, embassies, or trade routes, the US involvement in territorial or colonial style agreements, or more metaphorically, just some cultural expansion into other countries' spheres. But no doubt there's tension between the public mood and diplomatic messaging, confusion, mistrust, or controversy around alliance or public agreements, and some emotional volatility to do with misinformation and divided opinion. So this time frame, which is showing up heavy around November 1st, may see another stock market variation or jump or dip based on foreign policies that become unpopular with the American public, or based on leaks or media coverage revealing the real terms of an agreement which sparks backlash, which then leaks into the markets. There is a lot of distrust of the government's international motives, with fear of covert programs and immigration extradition matters or military presence. So many emotional reactions are based on this moon in the 9th house placement, with a public sense of feeling manipulated or maybe just feeling left in the dark. So I expect to see a difficult public time emotionally around the beginning of November. Then we have probably the most interesting placement of all, at least in my eyes, which is Pluto in the 12th house of the USA solar return chart. The 12th house shines this big spotlight on hidden things. It's very shadowy. And it's often to do with secret enemies, which in mundane astrology is espionage, intelligence operation, and covert military or political actions. The 12th house is prisons and detention centers and long-term care facilities. It's places where people are isolated and confined. It's also hospitals. It's also health crisis, especially involving toxic conditions potentially related to environmental or technological factors. And then finally, but definitely not by any means least, the 12th house is also secret societies, cults, criminal networks, and underground power struggles. So the core themes of Pluto in the 12th house for this year show power struggles behind the scenes. Surprise, surprise. It's really not that behind the scenes. We already know what's going on, but perhaps there is more to do with shadow governments or covert factions working in secrecy. It's the transformative destruction of hidden structures. So maybe the exposure of secret groups or criminal organizations. The biggest thing that I think relates to us all are the potential of health crisis linked to toxins or invisible threats. So possible public concerns around poisoning, radiation, or contamination of air, water, and even electromagnetic frequencies. So on the health and toxicity aspect, Pluto's transformational destruction can indicate health worries on a societal level. Environmental toxins and contamination, radio frequency, radiation pollution from technology, and this can create fear or outrage around media coverage, which may also itself be manipulated or poisoned with misinformation. So Pluto in the 12th house symbolizes prison and detention abuse, also abuse in elderly care homes, which is something we know goes on, but perhaps this year it's pushed even more into the spotlight. I would expect investigations uncovering mistreatment or torture in certain centers, revelations about the conditions in long-term care homes or psychiatric hospitals amid a public health crisis. And on the topic of health crisis, this being linked to environmental or technological toxins, this could be public concern erupting further over unexplained illnesses that are deemed potentially linked to radiation exposure. So think 5G networks and military testing, and perhaps a nuclear facility leak. I would also expect reports of contaminated water supplies, toxic air pollution in certain regions, and widespread illnesses caused through many different things, one of which is showing up as poisoned or polluted honey. The honey that you put in your tea, the honey, however you use honey. I don't know how people use honey, maybe in yogurt or something, but looking at how the poisoned products are really coming from an environmental factor. This could start from within nature itself. Other 12th house Pluto examples: media exposing secret surveillance or misinformation campaigns, growing public support for new housing initiatives, unexpected political moves or reforms impacting family policies or home ownership, technological developments, maybe a surprise financial development in housing and real estate markets, booms or crashes in the property market in this term of urban renewal, or maybe gentrification surges, or just market corrections. And this one seems to be important because it does show something very similar to the market crash of 2008. And for every concern, there is also positive potential. Pluto in the 12th does suggest a launch of more groundbreaking tech startups, either in real estate financing industries or in the wellness and medical world. And it's going to be tech companies that revolutionize these sectors, home and health. And it could also, with the idea of a new tech startup coming from within the USA, it could also position the USA as kind of a leader in some technology area too. And this really is the biggest position of the chart that I'm going to watch for myself and the timeframes to expect, because it hints at so many changes and announcements. And the days of those changes and announcements are as follows: 25th of July, 2025, 25th of September, 2025, 26th of October, 2025, and then the biggest date of them all, 23rd of January, 2026. And if you're only going to put one date in your calendar, it should be that January 26th date. Moving along the chart, moving around the wheel, we see Saturn and Neptune conjunct in the second house. This is all about discipline and idealism in national finances and resources. So careful management of resources amid a crisis, whether that's a health crisis or a market crash crisis. It just uncovers challenges and maybe even corruption affecting the budget or affecting some environmental cleanup. So think along the lines of discovery and correction of financial irregularities or hidden debts in government agencies or public programs, the launch of realistic and visionary diplomatic initiatives that are focused on sustainable development or maybe even international aid. I don't doubt that there'll be some setbacks or regulatory hurdles during this chart activation for new tech incubators or creative industries that rely on public funding. I'm really looking at the last solar return that the USA had with this big outer planet conjunction. That was July 4th of 2019, where the chart showed Saturn in the 4th house and Pluto in the 5th house, but these two being conjunct across houses. The interesting thing about Saturn in the 4th is that Saturn means restriction, and the 4th house represents home. And indeed, that solar return year was when we all had to literally stay at home because of restrictions. So circling back to how I think this will be an absolutely astoundingly memorable year that might even make history in the way that the events of 2020 did. What kind of history could that be? Given Saturn's limitations are now in the second house for this chart of 2025, Neptune's conjunction to Saturn and the nature of those limitations carrying an edge of dreaminess, manipulation, deceit, or health and wellness themes, heavily involving the USA, you might see things like restrictions in medical care and the medical world, which as of July 3rd, 2025, we're already aware of, right? That's not new information at all by any means. But based on the solar return chart and the maximum capacity of what is happening to the medical world, the healthcare services and insurance, all of that is only just getting going. Given that the direct activation of this Saturn-Neptune conjunction in the second house is on March the 22nd and March the 23rd of 2026, what we are seeing developing now is just the start of an even bigger, huge development. The way that COVID changed life, so will this. And it very well might stem from a wellness medical situation, the way that the virus did. It really might be something that starts that way, or it could just be, the restriction of certain medications, the access to medications, or just things being priced out of affordability in the medical world. The survivalist energy that is very common with world wars is present, even if there are or are not any wars going on, even if something big does or doesn't develop. It's kind of like this realization that, FYI, there is always war going on beneath the surface. And if you aren't strengthening your personal health, strengthening your arsenal by building resilience and sharpening your skills and getting as smart and healthy as you can, like genuinely working on all the things to optimize your health and wellness, then the vulnerability of needing assistance and needing it from places outside of the self, which is what we're supposed to be outgrowing, it gets super challenging. The vision of the future based on this chart and many charts moving forward is that support becomes localized over the coming years. It's small, close-knit groups, and I think the best word to use is units. It's units of people. So start to look locally for health and wellness and connection groups that offer you the kind of support that is ongoing and changing, different from the bigger constructs out there, and supports you as your needs require. Other things from this Saturn-Neptune conjunction in the second include reforms and rules around alcohol, maybe lots more punishable alcohol problems, maybe alcohol problems in terms of toxic or poisoned. I don't like the word poisoned in terms of alcohol because it can sometimes be seen as a poison already, but a lot of issues with the alcohol, tobacco, firearms industry, and also some curious matters around oil and water. And if you are starting a beverage company or you're involved in the liquid and beverages industry, then this would be the year to really get serious about that, because it could pay off handsomely. So this is March 22nd and 23rd of 2026. Alongside the January 23rd, 2026 date are two of the biggest moments coming in this solar return year. So mark your calendars. There could be legal or regulatory changes impacting healthcare systems and their financing. So laws tightening or redefining what funding is available or how healthcare is delivered. Potential cuts or caps in medical funding, confusion or uncertainty around healthcare policies. And this could be the start of rebuilding these systems from the ground up. Saturn demands integrity, Neptune seeks vision. And happening in Aries, this means that rebuilding what we value economically and personally with courage and urgency and clarity is incredibly important. And just the way COVID shifted priorities away from hustle culture and towards work-life balance, this activation in the USA solar return chart can make people and governments reevaluate what's truly worth investing in. So things like more focus on health, time, freedom, and security. And the positives are that more people may turn towards minimalism and essentialism or self-sufficiency. It's a renewed focus on honest, value-driven leadership and some pretty big leaps in the healing realm. As the past few years has exposed how fragile the healthcare systems are, and it's triggered things like telemedicine and decentralized care and pharma reform. This transit might create a problem that then results in a fresh drive and push for affordable care, medical tech innovation, and restructured public health funding, which, if pursued, will give more accessible healthcare models, will improve telehealth and AI diagnostics and at-home medicine. This might be the biggest visible moment of integration of mental health into mainstream systems. And outside of the wellness stuff, you might see a rise in micro businesses and creators and remote work independence. People will begin to invent all of these new sources of income, especially from tech skills or from their natural skills and passions. The recent years past have definitely taught us how to cope with limits and how community and adaptability and inner strength matter more than luxury. So Saturn in the second this year says the US and its inhabitants need to cut the fat. And Neptune says we also need to dream in a better, bigger way. And then the combination of this in Aries says do it now. So this is the, let's call it, last chance year to develop resourcefulness, because resourcefulness becomes a superpower now. Learning to live with less, but that doesn't mean compromise on quality. It means live with less and live better. And the next position on the chart, the next point on the chart is yet another financial point. It is Chiron in the second house. Chiron is an asteroid considered the wounded healer. So this is the development of more wounds or the necessary healing happening in areas of economic stability. The national level possibilities first show up in banking and finance, so scandals or trust issues involving banks, stock exchanges, the Federal Reserve, an increase in public skepticism towards financial institutions, the potential for cyber attacks or data breaches in the financial sector. And this may play a part in the push for regulation or reform of digital assets or central bank policies. In the same kind of direction, this points to currency and debt. So currency devaluation or just currency volatility. And if you're interested in the foreign exchange market, start researching that now. This date time frame of Chiron's second house influence showing up is April the 19th of 2026. So it's very close after tax season. So maybe some tax season stuff, some monetary law matters. Just all things financial, credit downgrades, increased focus on national debt, policy conflict over fiscal restraint versus economic stimulus, legal political disputes over land, water, and mineral rights. So some economic imbalance due to environmental degradation or resource mismanagement. This kind of brings back trade disruption or tariff-related conflict which harms domestic sectors. Some import-export imbalance which causes industry strain or shortages of resources in the USA. There's talks of supply chain vulnerabilities becoming a national focus around April 19th. The next couple of points of this chart before I wrap up this long and very complex episode, some real-world possibilities that are US-based. A housing market disruption or reset. With Uranus in the solar return fourth house for the USA July 4th, 2025, sudden housing crash or market correction movements, especially due to interest rates, or maybe even due to insurance failures or economic policy, could show up. Expect major real estate developer bankruptcy, a reset moment in home ownership models, rent to own, and community land trusts, or federal seizures of distressed properties. The potential of widespread foreclosures or unaffordability protests, especially in urban areas. There could be a lot of tech driven real estate innovation. So, rapid expansion of, I don't know, something like a 3D printed home or modular housing, and just AI optimized buildings. Maybe even the rollout of blockchain based home buying, tokenized ownership, maybe more and more people purchasing property with cryptocurrency. But this Uranus placement also suggests zoning changes that allow off-grid hubs and cooperative housing models, and a surge in maybe climate resilient housing tech, flood-proof, fireproof, and elevated smart homes. The fourth house also pertains to the climate itself, so some natural disasters, earthquakes, floods, fires that damage property and displace people in key regions, which is especially showing up this year in California, Florida, and the Gulf Coast. And these situations, these natural situations, disasters, might result in federal state intervention and subsequently put strain on the insurance industry. Also, under this umbrella of Uranus in the fourth house, land ownership conflicts, land disputes, especially around indigenous land rights, agricultural innovation or even crisis, so shock events in food production, farming subsidies and supply chain failures, and the rise of maybe something like AI, robotic farming or vertical farming, and gene-edited crops, stuff like that, all showing up due to labor shortages or ecological stress. Uranus at 29 degrees Taurus in the fourth does suggest, really, though, that it's the biggest breaking point in America's housing, land, and domestic stability systems, driven by financial shocks, driven by tech innovation, maybe even driven by internal rebellion to a degree. And this affects national identity and collective security. The date that this shows up is May 20th of 2026 and is worth noting now, especially if you want to get on the property ladder in the future and you felt like you haven't been able to with the way things are. If you wanted to do anything with land and real estate, then have this date in the back of your mind and start planning now for a potential change at that point in the future, May 2026. Because imagine being ready to pull the trigger on a house purchase just as house prices drop. And while shock developments are always initially difficult to deal with, there are positives that come out of everything. The overall interpretation for this area of the US solar return chart shows disruption with Uranus in the fourth house in the shape of housing market instability, so economic correction or a crash in the real estate world. And then a few days later, on or around May 22nd, the fourth house Venus placement is activated, which sounds really technical and engineered or whatever, but that just simply means that any previously imprinted planetary effects are switched on at the time of the conjunction happening from the sun's position. And so the chart just says that this time of year is fruitful for a certain experience. It's that this season brings potential that opens up. And it's pretty much like how you can't harvest a crop unless it's the right time to do so, where you may not be ready to jump into the housing market now, but should economic situations change both in your personal life and the market itself, you might then be ready at that future point. Timing is everything, and really astrology is just about patterns and cycles of time. So a few days later, once the dust settles and the buzz has settled, the developments do turn towards housing market growth. That would be a ridiculously quick rebound, but if you do think about it, a crash or just a pricing drop of houses, there might be people ready in the wings to buy up anything that is an unbelievable deal. And so from May 22nd onwards, this initiates the start of an increase in home sales or refinancing, possibly due to improved lending conditions, maybe federal incentives. And realistically, this could be a thing for those people with the capital and ability to jump right on in and purchase houses at a low price post-crash. If you want to be one of those people, start preparing now for that time. And according to the chart, at 29 degrees and 0 degrees Uranus and Venus, respectively, it suggests a potential 29 to 30% drop in housing prices, making a $500,000 house drop around $150,000 to a much more affordable $350,000. And just for reference, in 2008, the general ballpark, the average national decline, was around 33%. So if this time it's around 30-ish%, imagine prepping for that now, especially if you're someone who wants to buy the house you live in or buy a new property or invest. Other things for the time frame of May 22nd, 2026 onwards, women's issues centered around land and housing. We might see more female purchased properties or female driven and led real estate groups. Lots of female presence in land, agriculture, and environmental issues. It's also entertainment, art, and sports around that May 22nd time. So a surge in, domestic festivals, art programs, investment in community beautification, more athletic events, sports campaigns with very patriotic overtones. And this does suggest improvements in public health. So if in that earlier January time, activating that Pluto in the 12th house, if that does develop into some kind of health matter for society, then May 22nd of 2026 kind of hints at recovery. The last couple dates and potentials I want to look at are June 27th of 2026 and then July 4th of 2026. So the end of June, all of these Jupiter-type things show up in the solar 5th house of the solar return chart. Expansion in 5th house areas include children, birth rates, entertainment, art, sports. Jupiter's influence really just brings growth and optimism and abundance and maybe sometimes a little bit of excess to these areas. And translated, this could be real-world potentials such as an increase or positive shift in birth or adoption rates. So an increase in birth rates after prior declines, alternatively, significant growth in adoption and foster care or surrogacy programs. And this might be backed by government incentives or social programs aimed at supporting families better. There could be some growth in genetic or designer baby technologies, like this cutting edge biotech that offers gene editing or designer baby services. And that maybe crosses some ethical and legal boundaries, causing some firestorms that erupt nationally and even internationally, because these technologies really challenge existing social norms. This 5th house Jupiter placement also suggests boom in entertainment, so more productions, more festivals, more events, a growth in sports leagues and major tournaments, and some stock market growth related to real estate. Jupiter expanding investment opportunities in things like real estate investment trusts and related sectors, potential bull market or this rapid growth phase in stocks tied to stocks that are in the real estate industry or entertainment, leisure, and sports. So If you're an investor, maybe you want to start researching real estate investment trusts and related financial products early in this period. Bringing us back to the final date, which is July 4th of 2026. Suddenly we're at the July 4th celebrations of next year. Sun in the 6th house is the final point. The sun is always the point of the entire chart, but it never really makes sense till the end of the birthday year. It's the very last thing to develop. So the USA's sun placement is about leadership, authority, visibility, vital energy, and government figureheads. And its position in the 6th house is to do with public health, medicine, epidemics, military, civil service, and everyday labor. What we could see being wrapped up at the end of this birthday year for the USA includes public health focus and challenges. So heightened national focus on health and wellness, especially regarding digestive illnesses and maybe problems with food safety and food contamination like mold in coffees or mold in honey, possible outbreaks or epidemics related to foodborne bacteria, gut-related diseases, or even substance abuse crisis, including alcohol and things like caffeine. The year is a whole plethora of wellness matters, and this includes medical information, misinformation even, confusion, and public disputes about health treatments. Expect stress and conflict in medical and wellness sectors for this year. Arguments and scandals involving healthcare policies, involving drugs, drug approval, regulation of the holistic wellness industry. July 4th, 2026 is the new chapter, which of course will have its own episode next year. I don't want to get into that yet. We're not even entered into this new solar return for the USA. But it's next year that the entire year previous begins to make sense. The solar return finishes by giving you the gift of hindsight. The sun in the 6th really does signal a year where the health of the nation will probably be a main talking point. And on reflection, it will be how the entire year brought increased attention to public health crisis. So yes, the USA this year will see public health and national care dominate the agenda. Matters of nurturing home and protective instincts and health issues will be central national focus. And if there is some kind of epidemic, then expect protective responses to such a health crisis. This could mean strong government involvement in managing epidemics, in dealing with food safety, or any kind of public health emergency. So start thinking about your health and your home. Start thinking about ways to improve your wellness accessibly in ways that you can, maintaining optimal health. Think about where you live, how that feels. Do you vibe with where you live? If there was an apocalypse style situation, not like in the movies, but just, a move towards a localized economy, would you feel comfortable, happy, and good where you live? If you had to spend the rest of your life where you are, would that make you happy? Also this year, think about your position in the property market. And if that's not of interest, then it could be just about figuring out your ideal place to live. Also think about yourself as a child, as a parent. Think about bolstering yourself and becoming a warrior, making sure that you do things daily that build a foundation of strength, both physically and emotionally. Protect your personal space, protect your well-being, prioritize your wellness. It is your most valuable asset. A few special mentions before recapping the biggest dates this year could be things like censorship and erasure or bans to do with books. So massive removal of historical or educational books from schools and libraries. This seems to grow. Possible plagiarism scandals, or this concept of rewritten history. There might be contracts and agreements and documents crossed with betrayal and hidden clauses. So backroom deals or unconstitutional executive orders that could reflect death of a treaty or a diplomatic breakdown. The mention of toxic honey contamination. There might be the discovery of polluted honey or poisoned supply chains. There's also inevitably news, media, and journalist issues crossed with disinformation. This is the weaponization of the media. Propaganda disguised as fact, mass censorship, and cyber attacks that might just be targeting journalists. A few major exposés leading to media infiltration by foreign powers. We could see comedians being censored, comedians being attacked. We might see some of our comedy heroes in targeted physical attacks. Dark satire becomes dangerous when it kind of touches on reality. If there are any accidents or, let's call it, transportation sabotage attacks, then it could be in public transport, bicycles, bus routes, cars, and a rail disaster. Some leaked text messages or some gossip social chat conversations that are crossed with blackmail. Pollution and bioweapon use causing air and lung-related respiratory diseases. Maybe attacks via toxic gases, air poisoning, or just a lung-based epidemic of sorts. This might particularly involve the Pacific or other Leo-ruled regions of the USA like Hawaii, California, and Detroit. Food couriers and short travel, some ambush along the way, some Uber-style gig working situations and people caught in the crossfire of trade and transport attacks. And with all of that, I know that's a lot, I know that is so much, but with all of that in mind, here are the top dates. July 23rd, 2025 is the first date we see the beginning of more intensified trade, foreign policy, and legal negotiations, maybe the start of a window of communication-related agreements. August the 1st to the 2nd of 2025, a possible announcement related to an international agreement or conflict, maybe a legal matter. September 3rd, 2025 is the peak or resolution of foreign tensions or legal disputes or trade agreement conflicts. Maybe it involves the finalization or the public fallout from earlier summer developments. November 1st, 2025, public backlash or emotional reaction to foreign treaties, to immigration policies, to leaked government secrets. January 23rd of 2026, some kind of health environmental issue, possible information leaks, a whistleblowing on a health matter, just wellness and health medical problems, maybe including the escalation or public exposure to some kind of toxic health crisis. March 22nd to 23rd, major financial, medical, or systemic event window, which is compared to the magnitude of COVID's transformative impact. Maybe showing up as a climactic point in budget or healthcare restructuring. April 19th, 2026, financial pain points, potential for monetary strain, or maybe even recovery through reforms and support structures. May 20th, 2026. This is where I'm getting that kind of potential housing crash, real estate market and tech shifts, some insurance failures, or public backlash over affordability, maybe even land disputes and some FEMA reform. May 22nd, the start of an opportunity where Venus is activated in the 4th, suggesting favorable developments for the people to do with home sales, to do with refinancing, maybe a stabilization of the housing market or a price drop that makes things affordable. June 27th, 2026, growth in children family-related policies, growth in entertainment, sports, and art, potential rise in fertility and biotech around reproduction, and a boom in real estate investment trusts. And then July 4th, 2026, a reflection on how the entire year focused on public health and labor and civil service. Caregiving matters dominate the national conversation. Major focus is on food safety, workers' rights, the response to health crisis, and it's a reflection of the entirety of the year, where it comes to home, where you feel at home, and how healthy and well you and your family are. If you are all about learning how to do your own solar return chart, if you want to be able to read your own chart and other solar return charts too, just the way this was kind of read through with chronological dates and events, then don't forget to check out the link to my ebook below. Once you have that ebook in hand, you can read as many solar return charts as you like, including the dates, including the predictions. And you can do this for the rest of your life with this one ebook, because the book is just the foundational structure to do so. And you don't even need to know astrology. There is no jargon. Everything is explained in a step-by-step way. It shows you how to do this for yourself and your loved ones too. That link is in the show notes below. Have a great weekend, and I'll be back on Monday with the regular weekly horoscope forecasts. Until then, bye.